Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to our Jitterbit Tech Talk. My name is Micah Johnson. I am the training systems admin here at Jitterbit, and with me I have Corey Willis.
Glad to be here.
And Corey is the director of customer and partner enablement here at Jitterbit. He runs our training team, really does a lot of great stuff. And he is our subject matter expert today for our topic on Open API Portal Manager. Sorry, got a little tongue-tied there. But yeah, but before we dive into that, wanted to cover just a few quick things. As many of you know, we have the big Dreamforce conference coming up. Corey and myself will be out there. We'll be working the booth.
2 weeks from today, I believe.
That sounds about right. Going to be giving demos, answering questions. So if you're going to be in the San Francisco area, stop by and see us. We'd love to put a face to some of the email addresses that we see coming through training. Always love to meet customers, partners, whoever you may be. And we're going to be in the .org lounge and in the Trailhead Expo, right?
I believe that sounds right. Yeah.
All right. So we're looking forward to that. Hope to see you guys there at Dreamforce. But
and let me tack on to that too. I believe that there's some opportunities to have some one-on-one meetings. If you have not heard about that yet, reach out to your customer success manager if you're going to be there, and we'd love to get up with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, today, like I said, we're talking about our Open API Portal Manager. Jitterbit has really done a lot to build out our API functionality, especially in the last couple of years. You know, we've had API built onto the product, but we've kind of taken an API first approach in some ways to really beef up that product offering. And we're real excited about some of the features that we've brought in. And so, Corey, can you give us just a little bit of just a brief intro to what you're going to be showing us today?
Yeah, well, first we're going to just really talk about kind of that overall API first strategy and how that fits in. And as we talk about that API first strategy and really what that means, and now I'll tell you guys, it's one of these things where if you ask 10 different people, you're probably going to get 10 different answers, but there's a common thread, and that's what we want to focus on. But as we go through that, we're gonna go a little bit deeper into kind of what we are using as far as our documentation portal. That's a lot of what this is really focusing on today. How we leverage our Jitterbit environments in that and some best practices around that. Security access controls, just a lot of different things. And then we're gonna, after we talk about it, we're gonna dive in and show some examples of how we can actually mock up some APIs, how we can document those APIs, and then dress up that documentation a little bit. So yeah, that's a little bit about it.
Okay.
But I guess let's dive into this whole API first discussion.
Yeah, what can you give me? You said there's lots of different definitions. How would you define it? At least the common thread that we would see in terms of Jitterbit.
Well, so to do that, I almost have to kind of take you guys back. You know, back in the day when I was working on direct systems, we would build user interfaces that would tie in directly to the back-end databases. Okay. We would have, stored procedures in the databases, and that would almost be kind of like our API layer. It's like we were trying to do it, and so we would do it with stored procedures. So we're not putting all the SQL directly into kind of that front end system. But the fact is, guys, there are all kinds of legacy systems out there. And then now we're at a point where it's like, hey, data lives in multiple systems.
Absolutely.
And so we're getting to a point where it's like, we want to have something that can extract that data and really move away from user interface based systems to data systems. You know, our data is valuable, and our data lives in so many different places out there. It might be those legacy backend databases. Now we've got some out on the cloud. We've got some in systems like Salesforce. Of course, we're going to Dreamforce. You know, you got things like that. You've got systems like NetSuite or SAP. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And so many different places where that data lives. And one of the great things about using a system like Jitterbit to be your API provider, your API layer, is that you can connect to all of those. But the way we used to do this is, oh, well, now we have a product, we've got a user interface, somebody's needing an API, let's bolt on an API, and it's this afterthought.
Just built on top of an ETL solution.
Yeah. Or it's not even on an ETL solution.
Well, that's true.
You know, you're just going out there and doing some custom code and throwing together an API, but it's all an afterthought. And so then all of a sudden you make a back-end product change and it breaks your API that now you have other products relying on, other customers relying on, other partners relying on. But because API is not productized, it's not product managed, it's not first, now you've broke it and you don't even really realize it. And I mean, let's be honest. If we're really honest, we can all think of situations, maybe not identical, but at least similar to that. So the shift in this is API first. You know, if we're going to go in and maybe it's an old legacy system and you're sitting there going, well, it's time to build a new UI. Hey, that's a perfect time. Because the fact is, it's not always the perfect time to go build an API strategy. Well, I mean, we would love for it to be, but it just isn't, okay? But you have opportunities, and so take the opportunities when they come. And so it's like, hey, we need a UI refresh. Well, rather than just dressing it up, let's go in and say, hey, maybe this is the perfect opportunity to do an API first strategy. And let's take that data, that valuable data, and let's build an API that's intentional. And this kind of goes through an overall process where first we spec it out and we say, what do our consumers need? Who are our consumers? I guess would really be the first question. We might have internal consumers. We might have, our internal products. We might have external consumers. You know, we may want to do some business to business API transactions. You may have partners that you're working with. There's all kinds of different ones, but define that, spec that out. Who are your consumers and what do your consumers need? How do you want to expose that data? Once we get that spec and we've decided that, then we go through and we dev or we mock it up. And that gives us the ability to kind of go through a testing phase that's very quick. You know, in the old days, we used to build all this on top of the old platform and it would take a long time. And then we would get out into, you know, hey, we've pushed this live, go do your testing. Oh, well, now it doesn't really work. We want to add a field. You add a field to an API, it breaks something else. This gives you a method where it's like, hey, we're just going to mock this up. We're going to do some tests with some dummy data. And it allows you to really go through and iterate very quickly in this process to where you've now got basically an agreed upon structure of what that API is going to be. And you say, okay, version 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, whatever it might be, of this API is this, and that's not changing.
Okay. And so if you're working with multiple teams, that gives them a single source of truth where they can build the UI side or they can build the integration on the back end.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's overall this concept, because once you get that API first, then you've got that documented, you know what that's all about. Your people that are consuming it can start building their side of things with your mocked up data. Your backend developers can now start building all the Jitterbit processes to go into the 14 different systems that you have out there, aggregate that data together to expose in the API, but you've already got the API first. So it's not so much a technology limitation, it's a mental limitation. It's our thought process. It's the methodology.
And we're really shifting from building first to truly designing what we need first.
Yeah.
And I believe you also said it's called design first or contract first. Those are some other phrases.
There's some other terms. And that's the thing. It's like the contract first, that's kind of that methodology of, hey, the API is our contract. You know, and if we're going to add a field, well, we're not adding a field to version 1.0. We're going to create version 1.1. You know, we're going to go through these iteration processes. So that way we don't deprecate out the old functionality unknowingly.
Okay.
There might be times to deprecate, but you do it intentionally.
Well, that's interesting, and I would imagine you're going to show us some of that here in a few minutes. But for right now, you know, a big portion of this Tech Talk is talking about API documentation, the Open API standard. Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So if you guys haven't seen, we're going to show it here in a few moments. But when you build APIs on the Jitterbit platform, you have the ability to auto-generate a documentation portal. Now that auto-generates in the Open API Standard 2.0, but since version 10.2, which came out in June, so it's been out for a while now, we do support 3.0, which gives some really neat new functionality in the standard. So we do have that out there, and it gives you the ability to have that documentation portal. But you know, I mean, why would we need a documentation portal? You know, because we have to have a way to define that contract. We don't want it lost in somebody's email.
Exactly.
We don't want to like, hey, I'm going to shoot you over a copy of this JSON file and that is our API. No, put it in the documentation portal. So yeah.
Okay. And then, and moving on from that, I mean, that used to be called Swagger, right? Just so
Yep.
we're all on the same
So if you're
page.
familiar with Swagger, this is Swagger. You know, it's been renamed in the industry. It's the Open API Standard, OAS, and we do support 3.0. Defaults to 2.0, but it's just some minor changes there.
Okay. And so once we actually put this documentation together, it's auto-generated, and then we've cleaned it up, made it the way we want it, maybe even added in some of that version 3 functionality that you're talking about, then how can we share that out to the other people that need access to this contract?
Yeah.
They need to build it themselves. How can
So
we
our other internal users, our partners, our other customers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is the cool thing. It's built into the Harmony platform already. And I'll when we get into the demo side of it, I'll go in and kind of show you guys where that's at. But we have a user role that's an API consumer. And that API consumer can access the documentation portal. It's access controlled. They have to have a Harmony account. You invite them. Now remember, in our licensing, we don't restrict how many users you have. So you just create that specific role. You put all of your API consumers in there. They're invited in to create their account. And then they can have the access controlled access to the portal. So it's not a public portal. It's an access controlled portal. So you can control that. But yeah, that's how we do it. We can show it here in a few moments.
Okay. Well, with that, I mean, pretty much we're really at a point, I would imagine, where we can kind of jump into the demo if you're ready.
Okay.
And just kind of get hands-on with some of this stuff. We don't want to just talk tech. We want to show a little tech every now and then. So if we can get our screen share pulled up.
Okay. So guys, what I'm going to be showing today is in our Cloud Studio Designer. Many of you are familiar. We also have the Jitterbit Design Studio. You can build the back end in the Design Studio, or you can build it in Cloud Studio. Both are fully functional, both work, but I am showing in the Cloud Studio today, and that's what you see on screen here. And I've just mocked up one little operation here, and all this operation is just an API response, okay? So if we look at this, we've got our API response here. If you've gone in here and you're not sure where to find that, if you're looking over here in the connectivity pane on the right-hand side, it defaults to connectors, and that is not going to show API. It shows a lot of other things out here. If you guys aren't aware, we've had a ton of new connectors added in. You see Zendesk, Workday, you see Square, Sugar CRM, Snowflake. I mean, the list is just going on, and these are getting added all the time. There you see MongoDB, Magento, HubSpot, Jira. But you can go look at that on your own. But if you're looking at this and you're going, where's the API response? Well, just simply come up here and go from connectors to all and look right there. There's API. You click on it and you'll have the ability for a request or response object, or the SOAP request or the SOAP response. I just used a response and I dragged that into my operation. Just to give you an idea, it'd be kind of like doing this right here. Let's see if we can get it to come in there. Come on, wake up. There it goes. Computer's being a little slow, so I'll just pull that one off. But that's basically how we do it. We just drag it in, and it created a new operation. And then I needed a transformation. Now, this is key. You need a transformation if you're going to have the documentation portal automatically generate your schemas and your structures in there, right, Micah?
Absolutely.
Okay, so to do that, you just come over here to the little left. It pops up a new little placeholder, and you say new transformation, and it goes through the wizard, okay? So that's how we do it. I'm going to go back to the workflow and show you the one I've built. In this transformation, all I've done is just simply load in a JSON schema, okay? I just loaded in the JSON schema that I want as my response, and it's listed here. Now I'm doing a little mock-up here, and I'm throwing in some dummy data. But for this, all I had to do was just come in and put in a little static value, just so it's a valid transformation. I have to have something mapped, okay? Now, down the road, when I move from the mock-up to the development side, okay, guys, use your environments, okay? Use your environments. Create an environment for your API mock-up, a Jitterbit environment. Create another environment for your testing. And you may choose different terminology, that's fine. But choose another one for your testing that you're going to tie into your actual test data systems when you get into the back-end development. And then create another one for your actual production. So 3 environments is really ideal here. You can do it different ways, but that's what I would recommend. You may choose to add more. I've seen people go into full, like, mock-up, dev, test, QC, production, and just have a whole slew of environments. That's fine if that's works for you. But this is just in the mock-up. So later on, I would actually tie in my database or whatever my other system is as a source into this and actually pull the data, build in my query parameters. Not doing that yet. All I have is the schema. And if I go back to the workflow, you'll also see I have a little script here. Well, the script is super simple. All I've done is take my JSON mockup that I'm saying, hey, this is my contract. Now, I did a simple one. Obviously, you probably want to add in some error handling into this, some different things like that. I just did something real simple, but you just put this in, and I just used a variable, jitterbit.api.response, so that way I can hit this API. I don't have to have the back end, and it pulls back some sample data.
So this is just your dummy data that you're force feeding into the API so that they can test against your contract.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that way they can hit the API on the consumer side and go ahead and start building. They know what to expect. They know how the API works.
And really on their side, it's as if the API is live. Even though they're in the design scenario, they can build their systems as if they're getting, which they are getting, actual data through the API. It's not just
right. The
theoretical.
API is live. It's just the back end that feeds the API isn't built yet. It will be.
Definitely a new concept in this designing, but
yeah, I mean, it used to be we go build all the integration pieces, bring that data together, and then as an afterthought, bolt on the API. And the whole concept here is let's hit the API first. Let's design the API first, and then we'll backfill with the backend process so we match our contract. So that's what I'm doing here. And it gives me this single operation. So let's go back right there, that single operation. I'm actually going to delete this one down here just so I can get this deployed out. But there's the operation. It's going to give that API response. Let's see if my screen will update here. Yeah, my computer's kind of timing out on a few things, but there we go. There it worked. So we've got our sample operation. The next thing is that now that we have just enough to mock up the data structures, then we can move into the actual API build. Now, the API build itself is very simple. We've already done the bulk of it, but it's over here. Now, I've already done it here, but I want to walk you through. So I'm going to do another one. I'm going to do new API. And again, remember the environments. So we're going to select the environment. I'm using my TechTalk environment. We want a name. So I'm going to call this Get Customers Example. Okay. Service route, we put this as whatever, that's fine. It's going to default based on your name. You probably want to change that, but for what I'm doing right now, that's good. You can put a version on here. So I could say this is 1.1. Maybe I'm making a slight change. Okay, you can always clone these also, tie it to another operation, all kinds of cool stuff. When you get down here, of course, you get your timeout, defaults to 30 seconds. SSL only is on by default. I want to enable cores. Obviously, that's a decision you're going to have to make internally on whether you want to do that or not. If you want to use the documentation portal, it does require cores. Okay.
The try it out feature requires cores, right? You can still document it.
Yes. Yes. Good point. Thank you for that, Micah. The cores feature is needed for the try it out. So maybe you turn that on in your mockup. Maybe you turn it on in your test. Maybe you don't turn it on in your production. I don't know. You guys make that decision. Look up cores, do some research on it, make an intelligent decision. But also, I want to do the verbose logging. I like logging. I like lots and lots of logging. I like things in debug mode as long as I possibly can, because if something goes wrong, I want all that data. I like it. So I'm also going to turn on debug mode, and my default is, hey, it'll let you do it for up to 2 weeks. I'm going to turn it on for up to 2 weeks. Because like I said, it's in that first design phase out there when that's when things are probably going to go wrong. You go through those iterations. Hey, let's do something. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, let me go find out why. So I turn that on.
And it's a great opportunity to force some errors so you know what you're going to get back. In those situations, you can document them.
So it wouldn't let me do to the 19th. I'll go to the 18th. But we do next, and that takes us over here, and we decided, what do we want to put on here? And so I'll do my November API Tech Talk, my API Get Customers Operation. What method? Well, I already said it in the operation name, but it's a get. You can also do the puts, post, deletes, all different things like that. And this right here, typically, if this were more into my test, then I would probably be using final target coming out of that transformation. Remember, I put that script in there, and because that script is in there, I want to set this one to system variable. When I would make my test, I would go in and modify that. But for my mockup, the system variable works nicely. I'll assign the operation. And let's see, that is assigned. We'll go on next, and then we could do security profiles. Now, I've got a couple different ones in here, an OAuth 2.0 mocked up for Google, and a basic auth. There's some other ones out there as well. I'm just going to, let's say I want to put that on basic auth right now and assign that profile. I can do that. Okay, those are done in another area, but you see right here, there is a link to create a new profile. So we can do that right here live. But I'm going to go ahead and say next, and then it gives me a nice little summary screen. I can scroll down. That's exactly what I want. Save and publish. And now I have an API. Okay.
Wasn't too challenging.
It was not. It was really quite simple. But it does now give me this button here to say generate open API document. Okay, this is where we're moving into the documentation portal, which is the main purpose for today's Tech Talk here 23 minutes in. I apologize. But here we go. So we're going to click this. Now, let me, before I click this, Micah, there's something that we need people to be aware of when they generate their documents, right?
Mm-hmm. That is very true. Do you want to go into it, or do you want me to go into it?
Go for it.
Okay. So one thing we do have to be aware of is that even though Jitterbit supports multiple environments, our documentation portal is really set up as a single entity. And so it is segmented by environment, but it is refreshed as a whole. So if you've made changes to your documentation in a particular environment, you're going to want to make sure you copy that and save it somewhere locally. And then when you refresh, you can move those changes back in. But anytime you generate or regenerate documents, you are gonna it's gonna completely refresh your documentation.
Mm-hmm. And it's gonna do it across all of those environments. So it's just something you need to be aware of if you have made those customizations. If you're using the default documentation, nothing to worry about. Mm-hmm. If you've made the changes like what we're gonna show you here in a moment, that's when you're gonna wanna be a little more cautious and make sure that you back up those changes so you can bring your manual changes back in once that's done. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's dive back in. I'm going to click the button. Here we go. Click the button, and it refreshes things. And now this is my documentation portal manager. Okay, this is where I can build my documentation. As I scroll down, you'll see on the left-hand side, this is the OpenAPI standard documentation. On the right-hand side is what it generates. Okay, so remember, I set one to basic auth, so I've got the authorize section up here. As I scroll on down, we've got this default, and those are my different APIs there. Now, this one, it doesn't look like it actually did the full refresh, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So when I click the button, it took me here. It didn't do the full regeneration, which is good because you don't want to get into it by mistake. Let's see if I can get this to do a refresh. I may have to refresh my own login here. Let's just see if we can go back in. We'll try it one more time here.
And just while we're refreshing, within the API manager, it's a little bit different than some of the things you have in the Cloud Studio or the Management Console. At the very top left over here is really your primary tool for navigating the API manager. So, Corey came straight from that API creation screen, but all of these options are in this left-hand menu as well.
Great point, Mike. Thank you so much for that. Well, guys, we're gonna just kind of go ahead and continue. I'm not sure. I may not have deployed that operation. I'm not sure what I did there, but we're gonna go ahead and continue on because I want to show you more about how do you go in and customize this. I mean, this is fairly vanilla in what it is. Now, I'm going to also do this real quick. We talked about the portal manager. The access that you give to other people is going to look more like this. Now, you can customize this with a logo. Other than that, the general appearance of this cannot be customized other than the way that I'm going to show you down here with the actual OpenAPI specification. Okay. Well, let's go back. Let me show you some of that because there's some really neat things that we can do in this. So again, first of all, I mentioned about being able to upload the image. You can do that, put a little branding on there. But let's focus on what we can do with OpenAPI standard. Okay. Now, I've actually got a little cheat sheet here where I went ahead and mocked some of this up. So I'm going to copy this and I'm just going to change this upper section. Notice there at the top, Swagger 2.0 at that very top line. With what I put in, it changes it to Open API 3.0. And let's see what we ran into here. Okay, so we've got other properties here. That should clear up as we go into this. So that's not too much of a concern just yet. I'm going to go on down here, and we've got a few different things. I've got some other APIs from some previous builds. Let me go ahead and hide that. And you'll notice, first of all, with what I dropped in, notice this changed. Okay, so we were able to add some things. We were able to add, say, for instance, the description, the version, the terms of service, the contact, the license. We could add these things. So that's the first thing we can dress up. Oh, try to drop in a file that didn't exist. So the next thing is this section where now I have this customer and Bitcoin. It was on a previous Tech Talk that we built these Bitcoin APIs. So they're still out there. But they're all down here under this default section. I mean, default, that's just not,
It's a little bland.
yeah, it's not that appealing, right? So we want to categorize our APIs. So I've built these, put these tags in here, and you'll see if we look in the YAML, it's right over here. This is where I built those tags, okay? So the tags are there, and now I just need to tie the tags into those APIs. So we're going to come down here, and we're going to put in tags, and we're going to say that this one is Bitcoin. Okay, so it pulls all that. Notice right over here, it reorganized that. Okay, so pretty cool. Let's go on down, and let's do this on the Get Customers. So there's the Get Customers example. That's the one I was trying to get to come up earlier. So let's see here. Let's say tags, and this one is going to be customer. And so again, it reorganizes. We can come on down. We can add another one here. One of the things, if you have not done too much with the Open API, the Swagger docs, things like that, your indentation is very important.
I believe SmartBear has some tutorials on this YAML language and
absolutely. There's a
everything
lot of
there.
great information out there that you can pull on this. It's not really a Jitterbit thing, so we don't have Jitterbit courses on that at this moment in time. But like I said, there is a lot of good stuff out there.
I think you're missing a space on that tab.
Yep, that's where it's at. Like I said, guys, the indentation is very important here. So there we go. That gets that done. Looks like we've got some double. We've got a few things there. Should not have additional properties. So I've got a few little things I would need to debug. Another thing that we could add, and again, I've got this kind of in my little cheat sheet here, is components. There's a lot of things in here that are very reusable. So you can reuse components and just all kinds of different things that you can do with it. As I add that, this is just adding a security schema that could then be reused through these different ones. So we've got one that's not labeled correctly. Maybe it's this one right here. There we go. Okay, so there's that. Let me just grab my full example here, see if we can get past that little error that was coming up. Always fun when those come in. So I've got something somewhere there in my my YAML. I'm not going to worry about it right now because we want to get to your questions here pretty soon. And my main thing here was to really just kind of demonstrate how you can do some of this customization and how you can build this out. These tags are very useful. Of course, once you get these built, we do have like the try it out button. You can go in there and run an execution and see different things like that come up and get that API mocked back up. So you got a lot of options in here and what you can do. You can authorize through here. Of course, you've got to have that set up properly. But again, once this is out there, once you get all this done, you'll want to do the save and publish. I'm not sure if this will go since I've got those errors sitting in there right now, but we'll go try it out. We'll refresh over here, see if it came over or not.
Now, you mentioned earlier how it's a really good best practice to segment your APIs by environments. And isn't there something in the Open API specification to where we can actually variabilize some of the documentation?
You can do that. There are some options there. Also, you've got the different environments that are already built into Jitterbit. So you don't necessarily have to do all of that because we've got this environment. So here I could switch over to my API testing environment and I can have a whole nother set of documentation over here. Okay, so what this keeps us from doing is well, I'll put it this way, it allows us to keep things segmented completely. Okay, but if you do have a scenario where you've got a particular URL variable that you want to bring in, a path variable, you can do that in the Open API documentation. Of course, you can bring in different parameters, whether that's part of a parameter string or whether that's part of form data in a body, different things like that. You can bring all of that in, whether it's gets, posts, puts, deletes, all of that can be built out. Now, obviously, it's a lot more than what we can cover, in 10, 15 minutes of demo content within this. But like Michael was saying, if you go out there to the Smart Bear company, they're the ones that are behind the Open API standard. There's all kinds of really interesting tutorials out there that teach you how to do this documentation. And we've basically just brought in the Open API standard into the Jitterbit platform. That's what's probably the most accepted industry standard at this point. And so that's what we went with. But it gives you that ability to really get out there and do some cool things. But again, guys, going back to it, we've got the API first strategy, and that's more of a thought process. It's not really something that I can demo. It's just a thought process. How do you actually go about deciding that, hey, we're going to make our API rock solid. We're going to design it first. We're going to design it intentionally, and then we'll come in and put all the integration pieces behind it that actually feed that API. I've even seen some people that they'll go so far as they API everything and then they build their integrations to consume their own APIs. Maybe it'll work for you. It's all based upon what you want to do because you've got the different things. It's like some people like to do their integration straight point to point. Some people like something more of a hub model, and that's where kind of the APIs can come into play. And there's a lot of different strategies out there that you guys can use. But we want you to know what's available in the product and kind of how to get to it. Just to recap real quick, Jared, if we could go back to the screen share, I want to show you guys again just how to get to this. So I'm just here back at the initial portal as you log into Harmony, and notice right here API Manager. Oh, also I need to show that the security profile. Glad we came back to this. But once we're here, like Micah was saying, right over here on the left-hand side, this is the API menu. So you can see your APIs. You can go to that portal manager. That's where we're building the documentation. You can go to the portal itself, also get to your logs and analytics and security profiles. Now, these are the ones that I mentioned. I had the Google, the basic auth put in here. So we've got a few different ones, but this is where you could build those from scratch. The other thing I did want to show you guys, and then we'll get to Q&A. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and be submitting those in through the Zoom webinar questions panel. And we'll see those work. We're going to answer your questions live best we can. If we don't have the answer, we'll tell you and we'll go find it. Okay. But right over here in the management console in organizations, this is where we go and we create all of our organizational security profiles, not the API security profiles. These are the Jitterbit organization ones. And so we'll let this load here. And right there, you see there's my organization, the Jitterbit Tech Talk organization. And down here at the bottom, I'll expand this up. There you see my roles. Okay, so I have an administrator role. That's what I'm a part of. I have a Micah role because I don't want to give him full administrator access. Sorry, Micah.
You can't trust everyone.
Yeah, you can't trust them all. But then you've got the API consumer role, and I'll expand that. And I just created a little one here. But notice here on the permission, you have options. You have admin permissions, read permissions, you've got agent install permissions. These are not environment permissions yet. These are organizational permissions, okay? So API consumer is that role that you want to give to say, hey, I don't want you to have access to my Jitterbit projects. I just want you to see the documentation. Okay, so it's built in, it's right there. All you have to do is say add role, you type it in, and do role. And then once you create the role, then you come over, you set that permission. So I'll take off read and put in API consumer. And then you just simply go over here and you say, hey, let's add members. You type in their email address, it sends them the invite, and they're good to go. The other thing is that you will need to send them the URL to your documentation portal. Okay, but that's the only other thing. And then they've got the access.
And I do believe they'll be able to log in just at login.jitterbit.com, and it will direct them to that documentation portal as well.
Okay, so I was not sure on that.
Yeah,
so
even if you don't have that direct link, they can get there.
Okay. Well, it looks like we've got a few questions that have come in, and so let's shift over here and see what we've got in the inbox.
All right. We've got one question here. It says, hi guys, will be good to understand how to deal with version controlling when building an API.
Okay. So for that, probably the best thing would be to kind of show a little bit. Okay, so let's go back to the screen share again. I'm going to go back over to the API manager and my APIs. Now again, environments are important here, okay? But we're talking more versioning, and looks like I may have gotten logged out again here. We'll refresh and see what we can get. I've been logged in pretty much all day today, and it's not liking it. It wants me to log out and log back in, and I do not want to. So we're going to see if we can get it, but I may just have to do that. Yep. Okay. So let me just log out and refresh this login.
Well, and Corey, while you're logging in, I just want to cover one quick thing before we leave. We cover this in just about every Tech Talk, but there are several places you can go for more information on all things Jitterbit. We have Success Central. It's our documentation location. You can pretty much find articles on really any area of our platform, of the space, even other endpoints. There's some tips and tricks on how to connect to some of those. You've got Jitterbit University, where we host all of our courses. You can log in, you can view the catalog to see what courses we have available. We're constantly pushing out new material. And
there's a new one coming out, and just in the next couple weeks, that should be hitting out there. Introduction to Scripting in the Jitterbit Cloud Studio. So just a few little tweaks there. If you understand scripting in the Design Studio, it's all pretty much the same. But if you're new to Jitterbit, you might want to check that one out. Again, it'll be coming out within the next few weeks.
And probably be a good orientation into that new Cloud Studio UI. There are a few minor differences, but honestly, there are some pretty major improvements to that new tool. It really is our next gen tool. And then finally, we have the community where you can come out, you can ask questions, you can give feedback on things. You can idea portal. And we do implement a lot of customer sourced ideas into the platform. We really appreciate any feedback we get, and if you can help our product improve, we would very much appreciate that. So keep those resources in mind, but yeah, keep those questions coming. We're going to try to answer those. Corey, did you get your screen back logged in?
So we got re-logged in here, and so we'll go back over to the screen share. And what we're talking about here is versioning. Okay. Now versioning, you've got a couple different things. We've got the back end piece where we're doing the integration piece, and we've got the front end. Now, if we're taking the API first strategy, then we would want to start back with the mockup, right? So we want to go into the mockup, modify the JSON schema, the XML schema, whatever you're using. We'd want to modify that, create a new mockup. And then once we have that new mockup in the back end, then out here, and I'll take this get customers example here. All we have to do is clone. We just clone the API. Now we change. Well, we can leave the name the same here, but we just change the version. So we'll change that to 1.2. We could keep the service route the same, and I'll show you why here in just a moment. Because as we do this, it's changing. You have your version in the URL. Okay, so you can keep your service route name the same, just change that version. Everything else can be the same here, but as we move forward, now we go back into the projects. Okay, so we would go in, we would just want to have this api.get.customers be 1.1. We'd have a clone of the operation that's got the data mocked up. We'd want to do that first. Then we would migrate that from the mock-up over to our test environment. And over there, tie in the back end, let it populate those new fields. Okay. And then once we get that done, then we would migrate that over to production. And so that's how we would do that and not change the existing APIs, but create new versions. There's different ways. Some people want to do that in more of a complete package. It's like, okay, we are releasing version 1.1 of the API. And so you kind of clone everything and do it that way. Again, it's what works for you. I mean, for some of you, you might have hundreds of APIs out there and you only need to update one. So there's different ways you can do it, but you can always clone the APIs here. Of course, we can copy the operations over in Studio, make the changes, version those out. You can keep them in the same project, different things like that. Okay. So let's see, what else have we got, Micah?
Well, there's kind of a related question here. It says, does versioning of the API count towards the URL endpoint licenses?
That is a good question that I don't actually know the answer to. We'll have to find out on that one for you. Yeah, we'll have to find out and we'll get back with you on that.
Okay.
What else we got?
This one, along the same thread, are there licensing limits on the number of APIs one can define? Also, are there rate limits?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes. All right.
Yes. You do have limits on the number of APIs that you can create based upon licensing.
Okay.
And then on the rate limiting, also that plays in where there are rate limits for your organization. You can further rate limit to the environment, if I remember correctly.
I believe that's right.
Now, the environment would be a subset of your organizational limit. And so let's say your organizational limit, just for the sake of a random number, let's say you had 500 hits per minute.
That's a lot.
Right? It's an API economy, right?
That's right.
So let's say your limit's 500 hits per minute, but in your dev environment, you want to limit that to say 100 hits per minute. So that way you have at least that 400 left for production. Maybe you don't limit production, okay? But you can limit your other ones. So you can control the subsets of those rate limits. You can also limit it per API. Okay. So there's a few different ways you can do that. But yes, there is an organizational limit on there.
All right, we have another question here, and if you have questions, keep those coming. We'll stay on until we get all those answered. This one I'm not sure about, so I'm going to default to you. Am I able to create an API that can use Python into Jitterbit?
Python into Jitterbit. Feel free to clarify a little bit as I give you a response. Feel free to respond back here. But Jitterbit does support plugins. To be able to use Python, we don't support Python directly in Jitterbit. We do support some JavaScript. It's not a full implementation of JavaScript, be aware of that. But we do support some JavaScript. So you can do some of that directly in place of Jitterbit script. Python is not one that we support directly in there, but we do have the ability to do plugins. So if you want to do a custom plugin, we've got a course on that in Jitterbit University that kind of teaches you the basics of that. There could be some possibility of doing some of this. But you may have some more details that you want to dive into. And I may not be able to go that much deeper on it, but I'll try my best. And but hopefully that helps you out a little bit there. What else have we got? Let's see here.
Where can I find my organizational limits?
Where can you find your organizational limits? That would be a good CSM question.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay. That'd be a good one. Reach out to your customer success manager, have a conversation with them, see what your limits are. Also, I think there was another one here about, is there a separate agreement for the API manager? There is separate licensing for APIs overall. So again, that's one. Reach out to your customer success manager, have a conversation, see what you have, and see if that's something that you need to get added on. And that's a customer success manager or partner manager conversation there.
Mm-hmm. All right, here's a question. Can we create versions in the design studio, or what will be a best practice when you create your operation and you want to keep that one and then create a new test version of it?
Gotcha. Okay, so let's see here. Let me see if I can get into the get back over to the Cloud Studio. And I'll kind of show a little bit there. Let's see if it'll refresh. Okay, let's go to the screen share. And so over here, if we were gonna say go into this one, okay, and we'll call this one v1.0. Okay, so we'll just rename the operation with that.
Mm-hmm.
But then see what we could do, and let me see where it is, where it's at now. Where did this go? Always interesting when you encounter something that you don't expect live on a Tech Talk, right? So what we may need to do is to actually go in here and just basically create another operation.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some ways you can clone some things. We may not be able to do it on the operation level. I know there's a way we can do it in here. So we may need to get back with you on that one. Apologies. Like I said, it's part of going live and having multiple platforms that we're trying to train against here. But basically, we would make another version of that operation. We would name it version 1.1, and then we would clone the API and tie it to that one. It's just the specifics. I'm not finding the little button right now for whatever reason. But what else have we got here? Can the theme?
Mm-hmm.
Can the theme for the API manager be controlled by organization and or environment? Not at this point, that I know of. I don't know of a way to do it at this point in time. But here's what I would suggest. Go out to the ideas portal and put that in, because I love that idea. But go put that in, and everybody else, if you go check that out and upvote that if you like that, that will definitely help in getting that out there. But yeah, the theme itself, the actual like CSS behind it, as far as I know, that is not customizable at this point. You can put your logo in there, and you can kind of customize the actual Open API side of things, like I was showing. But as far as like background colors and things like that, I don't think that there's a way to do that at this point in time. But I love the idea. Get it out there on the ideas portal. That is within the
Jitterbit community.
Community, that's where it was. Brain going blank there.
And one little thing on that, you won't see the little ideas tab until you log into the community. So don't let that throw you off. Just log in, and then you should be able to submit those ideas.
Okay. So let's see here.
I believe that's all of our questions, unless you guys have something else.
I'm seeing one down here about does Cloud Studio and or Design Studio maintain change history for all of the components? There's some of that getting worked into Cloud Studio. There's more on the horizon. The legacy Design Studio, which by the way is not going away. Okay, just we're talking a lot of Cloud Studio today. Just always want to reassure those that are using Design Studio, it's not going away. Even though I used the word legacy, probably shouldn't have used that word, but it is our older tool, and but it's not going away. But on there we do not do a full change tracking. You can do a backup deploy. So when you deploy the operation, you can also deploy a backup, and that's a good way to do that. Also, everything on the back end is stored in XML. We've got a lot of customers that are integrating with more traditional change control management systems. So there's a lot of possibilities out there, but there's more on the horizon coming down the pipe on some of that. So let's see, anything else? Let me see, make sure we got all of these. So there's one just asking about other ideas of what to implement. It's tough to answer without knowing your particular situation. But I'll tell you what, if you want to have just a kind of a review with your customer success manager, that'd be a great opportunity to get in there. Just kind of say, hey, this is what we've got now. We'd like to be able to do more using the tool. Can we have a conversation about specifics and dive in deeper? And I'm sure they would love to have that conversation with you. So that'd be a great resource for you there. Always feel free to reach out to your customer success managers anytime that you have questions like that that are specific, and they can always get somebody technical on the line there if they need to as well. Just had another one come in. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, so talking about URL formats and how do we capture that URL to parse that out. So if you guys, nothing really to share here on screen, and I think we've done this on a previous Tech Talk to an extent. Do you remember which one that was?
I'm not positive. It was an advanced scripting Tech Talk. Did we do one on that? Because I remember you were parsing out this exact thing. You grab the full API URL from the.
I know there's a previous Tech Talk on it. We'll try to find that Tech Talk and shoot it over to you. Let's make a note on that. But yes, it can be done. There is a Jitterbit predefined global variable that is, I believe it's like jitterbit.api.full-URL.
Yep.
And you just capture that. You capture that full URL, and then you know what to expect, and so you can parse the other pieces of that out and find that individual piece that you need. Now, you can also do URL parameters, where it's URL $parameter name equals, and then the value. Those are done automatically. There's a jitterbit.api.request star, I think it is.
Parameters.star.
Parameters.star. And it auto parses those out. But those are for the question mark parameters, the URL pieces that you're talking about, and for those that are, if you've got like https:// your URL /company/person/preferences, and you want to parse those individual pieces out, yes, it can absolutely be done. And the way that I've done it in the past is using that jitterbit.api.full-URI, I think is what it is.
Yes.
And then I parse from there using Jitterbit Script. Oh, we've got more here. So yes, you could do a substring function. There's some different ways you can do some of that. Okay. Well, that looks like everything we've got so far. Oh wait, here's one. Query string parameters are building the request into the URL. It's completely your preference. For me, I like using the query string parameters for a couple different reasons. One, which again, if you ask different people, you're going to get different responses. But for me, security. The query parameters are actually encrypted in HTTPS, and the full URL is not. So I default to the query parameters. It doesn't work for everybody. You know, that's kind of honestly a lot of the newer APIs that I've seen out there use more of the URL path for that. I think the definitive line for me would be, if it's something I'm going to be passing anything sensitive, I'm definitely going to use a query parameter, or even better, I'll put it in the body.
Right.
You know, use more of a post or a put or something like that, which kind of goes against if you're doing a get and you're sending it. But you know, there's a lot of flexibility. So I don't know if that helps you or just confused you more, but that would be me. I would typically default to query string. I like the style of the other, and it can be done, but it's a little bit easier with query string and Jitterbit.
Well, and with the documentation portal, if you do put it in the body and you have a fixed structure, then the portal can actually build out your structures for you in your documentation.
That's a good point. The parameters you have to do manually and documentation.
Which is not necessarily hard, but it is something else to do. So just something to keep in mind.
Yep. And it really goes back to that. Are you going to use the traditional get for gets and post for putting data in? You know, different things like that. Or do you want to be a little bit more rogue and say do a post to actually do a query? You can do that, you know? So it all just depends on how you want to do it. Oh, we got some more here. Let's see. So I think that one there that just came in, we'll try to follow up offline on that, because again, there's some specifics I think in that. Oh, Well, let me back up on this, and we'll let this be the last. Well, if we've got others, we'll stay on till they come in. Again, licensing questions, go to your CSM on this. But here's I think the spirit of this other question that came in here, Micah, is okay. I can build APIs with Jitterbit, but Jitterbit already connects to a bunch of APIs.
Ah, okay. I'm starting to see it now.
So how do I choose what to do? Well, it's based upon what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to get data into the Jitterbit platform so you can do some things with it and then put it somewhere else, that's probably more on your traditional Jitterbit integration side.
Connecting to existing APIs.
Yep. If you're trying to connect to an existing API, existing databases, you probably don't need to build an API for that.
Right.
But if you want to take some of that existing data and create an API architecture that's going to be able to be consumed for, say, a front-end UI development, if it's going to be consumed by a business-to-business partner relationship, something like that, that's where you would typically be building APIs. And that's where you would go to the API first strategy.
Right.
So hopefully that helps there. Okay. Well, guys, I hope you have enjoyed it today. I see many of you are still on. If you do have questions, send them over. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the Q&A here, but we can always follow up offline. If you do have further questions, who do they contact?
Well, if you have questions specifically related to training, to this Tech Talk, maybe courses you want to get more information about, you can email training@jitterbit.com. If you have a technical question, especially related to your implementation, a problem you're having, please reach out to support@jitterbit.com, and they'll be more than happy to help you with anything you've got going on.
Okay. Well, guys, thanks for coming out. Again, if you're coming to Dreamforce in 2 weeks, we'd love to meet you and actually put a face with the name on the screen. You get to see ours. We don't get to see yours. So it's always cool when somebody comes up, shakes our hand and says, "Hey, I saw you on the Tech Talk a couple weeks ago." And then we get that awkward look like, "Oh, yeah." But hey, we'd love to meet you. We'd love to shake your hand and show you some stuff. So with that,
yeah, thank you guys so much for joining, and we will see you next time.
Have a good one.